Welcome back to Three Men and a Mystery. I'm one of the three men, John Lorden.
I'm Mike Morford.
And I'm Gray Hughes.
This is episode 8 of season 2, Silenced, the Death of Elisa Gomez. Now, on the last episode, Morph, you were asking if Elisa's daughter, Jade, might know more about their plans to get married that day. In Brad's interview, it kind of sounded like they decided to do it at the courthouse, and I was saying that it was clear to me that she was actually dressed for her wedding on that day, so they must have known beforehand. Well, I've been in contact with Jade, and the truth is somewhere in the middle. This is her reply. They were going to the courthouse to pick up the marriage certificate the day before her death. I remember they were talking about some issue with the certificate not being valid by the wedding date. So Brad said, let's just get married today, before they went to pick it up. I remember because I asked my mom if she could help me fix my boyfriend's car that day. She told me the story and said we could go to my boyfriend's after we went to the courthouse. This was hours before we were meeting up with them. It was decided that day to do it by Brad, but not at the courthouse. It was decided many hours before even going to the courthouse.
It's still trying to wrap my head around the fact that she's getting married and wanted it to be a big thing, and yet it's a very limited amount of people that are involved in it.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you something else. I've been going over the text messages between the two of them. Basically, their whole relationship is laid out in their text messages. And I am just really surprised that they got to this point at all. This is a relationship that seems like about every 2 weeks was just absolutely imploding. Like they were just fighting. And when they would start fighting, it would go on for like 12 hours. So it's kind of curious to me that we even got to that point.
I mean, it does seem like absolutely rushed. I mean, just he wanted to get married really quickly.
Yeah.
And it's almost like they got married. Maybe she agreed to get married thinking that that would be the thing that pushed them into an area where they weren't fighting all the time.
Possibly.
Maybe something like that.
Yeah. And I'm also wondering, because remember, we've got this little part of the story we haven't really focused on a whole lot, but she had 2 children kind of when she was younger. And then she did the surrogacy thing where she was expecting to be a part of that child's life. And that didn't turn out how she anticipated. I'm wondering if because she's 47 years old, she's feeling like, you know what, I really wanted a young child in my life and I need to get married to make that happen again. I think there might be some forces that are kind of pushing her to make that decision, quicker than some people might. So we've spoken a lot about Bradley Alexander. Last week, we heard him being interviewed by the detectives, and today we're going to review his criminal past.
And we are bringing back a guest from season 1, criminal behaviorist Sarah Cailean.
And welcome, Sarah. And tell us where we may have seen you before. I know that we've seen you on television many different times, and also let us know some of your upcoming projects that you're working on.
Hi. Well, thank you so much for having me back. I appreciate it. I guess most people, if they've seen me on TV, it's probably on HLN through the HLN limited series that I was a co-creator and executive producer of that aired last June called Hell in the Heartland, about the Laura Bible and Ashley Freeman case down in Northeast Oklahoma. And since that time, HLN has come to me a good bit to speak on any sort of like breaking news with crime, or, if there's a big development in a case and they're covering it during their daily coverage. They sometimes will have me on to give my thoughts on, again, the behavior or the criminal psychology involved. And I most specifically got to spend a lot of time working on HLN's discussions about the Jennifer Dulos case and Fotis Dulos, the domestic violence turned murder turned, I guess, disappearance of Jennifer's remains. So I'm glad that you reached out about this one, because the domestic violence issue and how it progresses is a really important one to me. And I'm eager to have it get out into the public sphere as part of true crime, more than it has been in recent years.
Yeah, definitely. I really appreciate that. I've been covering a case on brain scratch as well with similar themes. And in that case, the siblings found their deceased sister, and it seems like it's also a domestic violence issue. And it's really moved me to kind of look at that more. And with a case like this, it's really tricky because, we've looked at the physical evidence. We know that this looks like a suicide by all accounts. And I think the next way to try to process this is to look at the people and to look at their backstory and see if there is some type of behavioral element that we can see, an acceleration maybe on Bradley's part. So that's kind of the focus.
Right.
Yeah, that's really the focus of today's episode. And that's why we're going to spend a little time going over his criminal history. And before we start, just to make sure that, fair is fair, we did actually run searches for Elisa as well. And I cannot find any criminal history for Elisa. So with that being said, let's talk about some of the charges that we do see. Now, Brad was born in March of 1986, and his criminal history seems to start right around the age of 18. June 2nd, 2004, we start seeing some charges. We've got a unreasonable acceleration charge. It looks like a speeding charge. And then a few weeks after that, August 24th, it looks like he gets pulled over for no registration. And then we slide a few months after that, February 7th, 2005, we get a driving while intoxicated. It's saying 0.17 DWI 4D. Do you know what that means, Sarah?
I don't know what the 4D, but I would assume that that's a subset that speaks to the fact that because he was under 21 at that time, in most states, there is a subsection of DUI laws that says essentially any amount. So even if he was 0.001, it's automatically a DWI or DUI, depending on the jurisdiction. Because he's not legally allowed to have any alcohol in the system.
Gotcha.
So they'll still list the amount. Now, it could be the flip of that too, is that some states have enhanced penalties if it is over a certain amount. And a lot of times that certain amount is 0.15. So without really quick looking into Minnesota's code, I would say it's either because he had any in his system or because he was over 0.15, in which case it's an enhanced punishment.
Okay, gotcha. And is it pretty safe to assume that the 0.17 is talking about his blood alcohol content? Oh,
yeah. Okay. Yeah, I would imagine. I mean, I guess it could be a 0.17 of a code, but again, the number would probably be longer than that. If they were referencing codes, they would probably have the full code number in it.
Sure. And it's interesting because it does show the 0.17 driving while intoxicated, and then there is an underage drink and driving charge. But for the level of sentence, it looks like they dismissed the underage drinking and they only made him guilty for the 0.17 DWI. So
right. So generally with it's funny, there are certain crimes or certain charges that will often be automatically what we call stacked, where there are multiple charges associated with it every single time.
Yeah.
And one of those is domestic violence, where you will almost always see like a domestic violence by, whatever, like if there was verbal language and then also by an actual assault, or, you know what I mean? Like there are two levels to it, and they'll almost always charge both levels. And then that allows sort of, some plea or allows some wiggle room for the judge, stuff like that. DUI is another one of those areas where a lot of times they will be charged with two separate things in order to give the courts some wiggle room on pleading down. Gotcha. Which obviously is what we see here, where they dismissed the underage.
Yeah.
Probably, I would bet that the underage, without looking at it again, is a lower penalty.
Sure.
than the 0.17. So they actually dropped the lower charge in favor of the more stringent enforcement.
Gotcha. And just to remind everyone, because maybe you guys didn't listen to season 1, Sarah also has background as a law enforcement officer. Sarah, how long did you work doing law enforcement?
Correct. Yeah. So I was an officer for about 10 years, and I was on patrol for the bulk of that time. So I'm certainly very familiar with placing people under arrest, both for DUI and for DV.
Gotcha.
0.17 is pretty. You're pretty drunk at that point.
Yeah, especially for a younger person. Although because his criminal record kicks off right at 18, I would, sort of bet dollars to donuts that there was criminal record for a juvenile as well that just doesn't turn up when you do a search. So
point.
he may be a steady drinker already at 18, and 0.17 wouldn't show as intoxicated as it might in somebody getting drunk for the first time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. It could be, he could have normalized himself basically to that type of
100%, in which case a 0.17 it's still pretty drunk. I mean, definitely have no business behind the wheel. But it might be a situation where he's still standing and talking and walking by.
Got it. So that happened in February of 2005. And then in October of 2005, we get another charge. Under type and status, it says this is a gross misdemeanor, DWI. And it looks like he's convicted. There's several that are stacked. They've got careless driving, open bottle, underage drinking and driving, underage drinking as its own charge. Several of them, actually all except for one that says 0.12, 3D DWI. So once again, I'm assuming that's probably his blood alcohol content of 0.12. They convicted him on that one charge and they dismissed all the rest.
Right. And, again, just sort of playing armchair quarterback, I would bet that because it was so quick on the heels of the other one, that when he got stopped and when the officers ran his record, they would have seen that he had already just been convicted. And so they're then going to really stack him. Okay. The idea being you hope that he'll actually get something that sticks and he'll lose his license, and in fact, he may have had, I'm looking at it as well. Well, that's October. In December, he's got charges for no license. So by then the court has yanked his license and he's still out there drinking and driving.
Yeah. So like you mentioned, December 13th, 2005, another DWI, 0.12 again, and looks like they convicted him on the DWI charge, tried to also stack on, it says MSD failed signal turns. So,
that would have been the stop. Yeah, that would have been what they stopped him for initially.
Okay.
Was the didn't signal before he turned.
And then no insurance on top of that. They dismissed both those charges, but they kept the DWI charge. Right. So
which is the strongest. Yeah.
Yeah. And here, just in the course of not even a year and a half. So we're already talking about 3 DWI or DUI charges that he's been hit with.
Yeah.
Right.
I think some people would probably sort of dismiss it. We all have traffic tickets we all have driving infractions in our history someplace, but that's a pretty troubling 18-month period or 12-month period, whatever it was, to have that many charges and have, he's just setting a real precedent that he's a outlaw,
Absolutely. Well, and what he's demonstrating and just looking at it in black and white is that he has no impulse control,
right?
No ability to see the future. And again, at 18 or 19 years old, especially, in men, the frontal lobe is not fully developed. There are a lot of 18 and 19-year-olds making poor decisions, but this seems like, you're really looking at serious consequences, and he just has no ability to exhibit any self-control in that. So that's a level of impulse control that is already, to me, alarming. And just like the way he's driving, like there are so many reckless driving charges and excessive speed and stuff like that on top of it all, means that he is just flagrantly ignoring not only the law, but societal norms.
Yeah, and he can hurt somebody on any one of these events.
Well, and to your point, he's being so flagrant that they actually note that there was an open bottle on that stop as well. So he's literally driving around with his open container.
Yeah.
And the other thing that is kind of troubling about all this is these are the times that he was caught. Think of, how many other instances there is where he's driving around drunk and how dangerous
there is. Actually a statistical value on that. And according to NHTSA, to the federal government for traffic and safety, it is 80-1 is the number of times somebody who drinks and drives regularly will commit the offense versus the amount of times they are caught.
Wow.
That was the number when I went through my first academy in 98, 99. So it's possible that it's varied some by then, but statistics like that don't tend to vary very much. So you really are looking at he's he's doing it on a regular basis, and he's putting people's lives at risk every single time he does it.
Yeah. He almost won the lottery not killing somebody.
Seriously. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's amazing that knowing that type of information, that they don't really stiffen these penalties, especially for repeat offenders like this.
Well, they do. One of the language that I see here, and again, I wasn't an officer in Minnesota, so I know that the language varies from state to state. But where I see the word gross, that generally means that it's an enhanced.
Okay. Gotcha.
And you know what I mean? Like in Ohio, where I spent most of my time on patrol, it was by letters and numbers, right? So it would be like an M1 is a first degree misdemeanor. That's the worst. Versus, and it goes down through M4s to MM, minor misdemeanor. And then the felonies are the same way. Some states you will hear the words aggravated and stuff like that. That's those terms that demonstrate that the law sees this as a more serious version of that crime. And I'm guessing just from looking at that gross is Minnesota's version of the M1 or the aggravated,
Sure. So basically for the two stops, the one in October and then the one a few months later in December, those were both flagged as gross. So
correct. And it may be because it may be automatic that based on the length of time between them. You know what I mean? Like if you have a second DUI within a certain time period, it's automatically enhanced. There's a lot of stuff in the law where automatic enhancement kicks in based on previous behavior.
Gotcha. Okay, so in June of 2006, so we're rolling forward just about 6 months at that point, there's another charge, and I'm not sure what this one is. Were you able to find out what a GM DAC is? It's filed as a misdemeanor.
Right. It's a GM would be a gross misdemeanor, I would imagine.
Okay.
Give me 2 seconds and I bet we can find it for you.
Yeah, and it's stacked again. So they have MSD, DAC, and then there is speeding at the bottom, but they've dismissed the speeding and the MSD and they've convicted on the GM.
Right. Okay. So what it looks like, DAR, DAS, and DAC are all driving related terms. DAS is driving after suspension. DAC is driving after cancellation.
Oh, okay.
And DAM is driving, it looks like, without a valid license. So he would have lost his license based on at least the second DUI, if not the first.
Right.
And so then in addition now to getting stopped again, he's driving without a license, which is its own offense. Gotcha.
And at least that time, they're not noting a DUI or a DWI. So it looks like they get him for speeding and basically they...
Right. And then once they pull him over, they discover, and usually in those cases, once you've lost your license, you've also lost your insurance. And so then that's where he gets that extra charge.
Gotcha. So we then roll forward. Looks like he kind of stays out of trouble for a bit of time around that. I don't know if there's a jail term or something that keeps him off the streets, but we get to October 3rd, 2007. And this is one of the charges that we really, of course, want to look at. This is a domestic assault charge. It's filed as a domestic assault misdemeanor. Intentionally inflicts or attempts to inflict bodily harm.
Right. So usually what that language will speak to is that it was not just a verbal incident, that there was actual, right. So like I said, in Ohio, the way they're classified is domestic violence by menacing, which is saying, I'm going to hurt you.
Right.
And then domestic violence by assault is the actual act of physical violence. And in this case, what it looks like is the intentional infliction is their language for actually put hands on versus simply made threats. And then, sorry, I won't jump ahead.
No, that's okay. Yeah, because you're going where we're going. I mean, the next charge is February of 2009. And on this one, we've got a big stack. We've got terroristic threats, reckless, disregard risk, domestic assault by strangulation, emergency telephone calls, communication interference with 911 call, domestic assault, GM subsequent violation, assault, 5th degree. There's a lot going on. Can you break this down for us? What does this look like?
Right. So what I immediately see, we look at these sort of legalese terms, and what comes to mind for me is a picture of a couple having a fight The fight obviously is becoming very loud. He is making threats that he's going to harm her, which is the terroristic threats, or behaving in such a way that is putting her at danger. She attempts to call 911 and he prevents her from doing that.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the disruption of the 911 call. And then there is an actual physical assault that takes place, and it is enhanced to a gross misdemeanor. You see the term there where it says subsequent violation,
right? Which
means that they're acknowledging the previous DV charge, and then the bodily harm, 5th degree infliction or attempt to inflict bodily harm. I would presume, again, without being a cop in Minnesota, that is a lower level of physical harm. That it perhaps she was, initially struck, or where there wasn't, broken bones or like permanent damage.
Right.
Now what's interesting, one of the things I did look up is that Minnesota is one of these states that has a very specific subset of domestic violence law to cover strangulation exclusively. And that's incredibly important. I mean, the first thing I want to say is hats off to Minnesota for getting that right, because that is not the case in every state.
Yeah. And
we know that strangulation and suffocation in the act of domestic violence are the single largest indicators that this perpetrator will eventually progress to homicide, either with this victim or with another one. Wow. Right. So, and just as a PSA, if you are involved in a relationship or someone you love is involved in a relationship where there has been strangulation or suffocation, or is, the common term is choking, though, we all know what that means. It is imperative that they seek help and find ways to safely extricate themselves from that relationship, because it will escalate to homicide.
Yeah. And that's certainly one of the hopes that we have in doing this type of work, is that we're able to share information like this with people. And if that, puts a little tickle in your brain that, hey, am I in a situation like this? Yeah, please look at getting help for that. There's a lot of organizations that will absolutely help you.
Especially a guy like this, we see that he's a creature of habit. He does something once, he does it twice, he does it 3 times. So we see him getting into these physical things more than once. That shows a habit, which goes along with his history of doing bad stuff more than one time.
Right. And he is immune. It seems like he is immune from consequences, even severe consequences. I mean, I don't know if he went to jail, if he actually did any time for any of those DUIs, but it doesn't seem to matter. Like, he just continues to go about doing what he feels he's entitled to do.
Yeah, look, I'm really glad you're picking up on and you're covering the domestic violence issue on the show that I do regularly. You wouldn't believe how many people in the comments and just the number of stories that are covered. We covered the Doulos case quite a bit, and that one's one of the craziest ones I've ever seen. But it's just amazing how many people are affected by it.
Right. And that's sort of one of the things that has become really, really important to me as I have gained, just a little bit of a platform that I have become. If anybody follows me on Twitter, I've become very loud and obnoxious about domestic violence as an issue, because it is so much more prevalent than I think a lot of people realize.
Yeah.
And I mean, in my time as an officer, I made more arrests for domestic violence than everything else combined. And that is not hyperbole. I'm not exaggerating. Like, I could go through and show, I've got the receipts on the times that I, press charges on somebody, and DV is just rampant. It is an epidemic. And there was a time when it seemed like we were talking about it publicly and starting to take it seriously. Yeah. And we saw improvements both in policy and in public discourse during that time, but it's fallen off the radar a bit. And, we saw in the last couple of years, we saw for the first time in 4 decades, the numbers start to go back up. We are going in the wrong direction with domestic violence.
Is that, I was going to say, is that underrated? Is that a underreported crime too, sir?
Oh yeah. 100%. 100%.
Yeah. During this process where I've seen so many people commenting on it, a friend of mine told me about, there was like, I think it's cobras and pit bulls, like two different types of domestic violence abuser types. And I guess the cobra is the one that waits and plots and then strikes. That's more like a foetus doulos type. And then there's the other types that get angry and they drink and then they're escalating. And It kind of seems like maybe Brad's more like that type.
Right. And it's, I mean, at the end of the day, I like that comparison. But at the end of the day, there's a reason that domestic violence laws do include categories, like I said, for the menacing or for the verbal threats and stuff like that, because that kind of the control or the emotional and psychological abuse is that it sort of sounds more like the cobra that you're describing is actually present in both types. It may be more prevalent in those who jump, straight from being a little scary to being, to murdering their spouse. But I would say that doulos, as sort of the ultimate example of that, I am sure that there was physical violence in that home prior to that. It doesn't come out of nowhere. It does take time, and a lot of times it is a slow burn. But there are signs and hints all along the way. And again, that's one of the reasons we need to talk about it more, so that people can get out before it reaches the point of physical violence.
Yeah, absolutely. And just once again, there's a organization that I support occasionally on my channel called the Domestic Violence Hotline. And if I recall correctly, their website is thehotline.org. So if you think you're going through this, or if you have a family member going through this, check them out and look for the resources to get them help or to get yourself help, because they're definitely out there. So just to be clear, these charges, even though they seem similar, the one from October 2007 and the one from February 2009, these are two separate domestic assaults, right?
Right. Oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, it certainly looks like it.
Okay. I'm just curious about that because there is an article that's been written. Journalist Susan Dew wrote an article at citypages.com titled "From Wedding to Body Bag in 12 Hours: What Happened to Elisa Gomez." Yeah. I read that piece. It was great. I thought she did an amazing job with it. And,
I did too. Yeah.
There's one section in particular I want to share with you guys and share with the audience. And once again, my hat's off to Susan. I've been in some contact with her, a very nice lady and very helpful to this cause. At 20 years old, Brad was married to a woman identified as AJ Alexander. In 2007, he pleaded guilty to 5th-degree domestic assault, writing, "In an argument with my wife, AJ, I struck her with my hand and caused her pain." 2 years after that, one wintry morning at about 5 a.m., AJ turned up in the lobby of the Fillmore County Sheriff's Office with her 2 small children in tow. Her neck was red and swollen. She said she and her husband, Brad, were drinking and arguing over his extramarital affairs when she began to have an anxiety attack. She said she was trying to call 911 when Brad grabbed her phone, removed the SIM card, and confiscated it. According to the criminal complaint, she then retreated to her bedroom where she lay down with her 4-month-old and tried to calm herself. Brad came in around 3 a.m. demanding sex. When AJ refused, he, quote, tried to force it, the complaint continues. He sat up on the edge of the bed and began choking AJ by pushing on her throat with his fist and elbow and stating he wanted to kill her. It went on that way for several minutes, according to the complaint. When Brad finally let her go, AJ began coughing and throwing up. It was only then that he let her be and lay down on the couch. Since AJ had no way of calling the police, she waited until she was certain Brad was asleep before gathering the children and making her escape, she told the chief. He was ultimately convicted of domestic assault by strangulation.
We'll be right back after this quick break.
A lot of us struggle with finding happiness, dealing with tough life issues, and so much more. But you don't have to struggle alone, and you don't even have to leave your home to get the help you need, thanks to BetterHelp Online Counseling.
BetterHelp is available on desktop or mobile for both Android or iOS. You can speak to a counselor via text, chat, phone, or video.
Find secure, convenient, professional help that's affordable with BetterHelp.
BetterHelp isn't a crisis line, but you can find licensed professional counselors that you can speak to from the comfort of your own home.
3 Men and a Mystery listeners get 10% off your first month with discount code 3MEN. So why not get started today? Go to betterhelp.com/3men. Financial aid is available to those who qualify. Simply fill out a questionnaire to help them assess your needs and get matched with a counselor you'll love. That's betterhelp.com/3men. Find help to break through those personal obstacles with BetterHelp. Welcome back, and please keep in mind that our sponsors are helping us raise funds that will go towards investigating this case further and honoring the life of Elisa Gomez. So please show them the same support they're showing us. So before we went to the break, we read a piece of Susan Du's article. Sarah, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I guess the first thought is that it's textbook. Like nothing in that sounds particularly out of the norm of how a lot of these scenes in a DV incident will play out. You know, it's a verbal argument, and then, you know, sometimes it's the smashing of a phone or the ripping out of the wall. Or in this case, you know, the SIM card. We're just into the 21st century version of this. The attempted rape, which is what it is, regardless of whether or not it's your spouse, I think in every state now.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me that was not at least stacked. I can see where it would have been difficult to prove in court. But I'm kind of surprised and maybe a little disappointed that wasn't included in the charges. But again, I don't know what she was saying that night and how she may have not wanted to have that included. You know, it may just be that the officers felt like it wasn't, there wasn't enough to place it into the charges. You know, again, what we see with this guy is no impulse control and no ability to recognize that the other person is a person and worthy of back and forth with him. You know what I mean? Like, essentially, she's questioning him about these affairs, and that's enough for him to fly off the handle. And you know, it's just not surprising in the sort of, you know, narcissism that we often see with domestic violence.
Yeah, and I really get the sense of that in reading through the text exchanges between Brad and Elisa. Very similar types of arguments and fights. Elisa might have been too much for a guy like Brad to handle, just in terms of her lifestyle. This is someone that was effectively working several jobs to get herself through college, to finish her master's. And it's one of those things where you can see when they start fighting, he automatically defers to really kind of verbally assaulting her, knocking down her character. You know, oh, you're so much better than me. A lot of cynicism. Yeah. So
yeah, I mean, that's really common, because one of the flags that we see oftentimes before a relationship becomes physically violent is that the way that the abuser will seek to isolate the partner. And the fastest way to isolate somebody is to make them feel like you are their only source of feeling good about themselves. So it sounds counterintuitive that, you know, if I trash you, you will seek validation from me, but it actually is really common. They hone in on things that they think the person is probably, you know, self-conscious about or concerned about, and really drive at those, and then say, I love you anyway. Right. Nobody else is gonna love you the way that I do, because you are so deeply flawed. Right. And then when that person has sort of like lost that sense of self and the sense that they were capable of standing on their own 2 feet on their own, oftentimes that's when the violence sets in. And I think you're right that Elisa might have been a bit much for him. She was significantly older than he was. She's established. She owns a home. Right. She's, you know, known in the community. She's got a lot of support systems, not just, you know, we see abusers a lot of times isolate from the family because that's somebody's primary support system. But in this case, she had, you know, her mentor at the college. She had all these, you know, animal rights people that she was close to. So she had it would have been harder to tear her down in the long run.
Well, you hit at the beginning of that. You noted that there was an age difference, and he used that time and time again. He would basically call her old woman when they were fighting.
Which is, I mean, as somebody whose husband is 10 years younger than I am, I can see now. I have always in our relationship been the only one who had any concern about that. You know what I mean? It's never been an issue for us. And it would never in a million years would he, even in a fight, say something like that to me. But absolutely, just speaking as somebody who is in a similar situation in terms of that possibly being a sore spot or a sensitive spot. He zeroed in on what he knew would hurt her.
Right. I think this is the same. These two physical charges where he got physical are with the same woman. That's correct, John? Yeah.
AJ was the person. Basically, the first time it sounds like he hit her, and then the second time he was choking her and saying he wanted to kill her.
Now we also
and attempting to rape her.
Yeah, right. That should have been mentioned there someplace too. But didn't we also hear from another woman who was in a relationship with him too that experienced similar things?
Yes, and I do have some information we're going to touch on by the end of this. But even outside of that, I'm hearing stories from all kinds of different people. The problem is in many of these cases, either those issues weren't reported to the police, and in some of those cases, the people don't want to talk up even now at this point. And they'll tell us about it, but they don't want to come out publicly about it.
Yeah, behind the scenes, they please don't use my name, please don't use my voice. They're afraid of this guy, and we're not even halfway through these charges here. I'm a firm believer in when someone shows you who they are, believe them. Right. Don't doubt that when they say this is who I am and they demonstrate that. Don't think that there's someone else, because I think this guy's set the tone for who he is.
Who said that, of course, was Maya Angelou, and you know that she was also a domestic violence survivor. Mm-hmm. So it all comes full circle. And like you said, Morph, it's so underreported. A lot of times there is shame associated with it. What did I do? It's just like sexual assault, where it's, did I do something to put myself in the situation? And so they don't want to report it. And there is also the other element of just being physically afraid of this person. Yeah. And honestly, with this guy, I can see that. I could see if you lived in his community, even if Elisa's death, no matter what the circumstances are, I can see being afraid of him and not wanting to speak out against him.
There are, I've seen examples of implied threats by him, even to other people around Elisa. Yeah, it seems like it's a common mechanism for him to use that to control women in particular. Yeah. I haven't seen him. Yeah. And I do also just want to call out, I am so thankful that AJ saw what was going on here, that AJ took the right steps of reporting these two incidents, going through with the pressing of the charges, and then getting the heck out of this.
Yep.
Yeah. She could have been a victim. I mean, she could be dead if this would have continued.
Absolutely. And a lot of times those early signs are obviously they're the best time to get out, because you're still, more established or more supported in other ways. And also it's slightly less risky if he hasn't escalated to the point of full control. Right. But those signs, unless you know them, or you've lived through them, or you've had family members, or you've had training, a lot of those signs, like women, especially, like you said, it is men, but it's predominantly women, will get a sense that something's not right. That's why they'll bring this stuff up with their girlfriends. That's why they'll say, oh, he's so romantic, but this is a little weird, And if it becomes more clear that those signs really only go in one direction, they only are followed by more signs. And that, like, this, the sooner you recognize the off ramp, the better chance you have of escaping with as little damage as possible, psychologically or physically. You always hear people say, "Oh, why didn't she just leave?" And I can't even begin to explain how much more difficult that is. Either for like strategic reasons, like money and a place to go and stuff like that, or sometimes for the emotional reasons. And, last but not least, that is the most dangerous time. is in the 6 months to a year after, or either right before a violence victim is leaving, or in the 6 months to a year afterwards, are the time when they are most likely to actually be killed. And again, Jennifer Dulos falls right in there.
Yeah. Yeah. And is that because of the pending charges and stuff that's going on? Is there a particular reason?
No, I think it's because a lot of times there are not pending charges.
Okay.
Dulos had never filed criminal charges against FOTUS. It is psychologically, it's the loss of control. That is when they're the most dangerous, is when they feel it slipping away the most. So when what they have feared the most is this person abandoning them or leaving them, it looks like it's going to come true or actually comes true. That's when that, not to me, you're not going to, really comes out, and they're the most dangerous. And
they have a chance to have the ultimate, if it results in a murder, they have the ultimate final control.
Yep.
Yeah. And
honestly, if the perpetrator then commits suicide, that is also often a mechanism of control. It's like, you're not going to be the ones. It's not, we think of that as being, they're just cowards or this and that. It's actually an act of control to say, I'm going to shut up. And, again, keep coming back to it because it's been in the news so much lately, but it's also because it's such sort of the quintessential example of domestic violence that people didn't see out and about, is the Dulos case. And, here, when it looked like it was really closing in on him, he's not going to give her family that satisfaction. He's not going to give the courts that satisfaction. He's not even going to tell anybody where her remains might be. He's completely in control.
Right.
A lot of people on my, on the channel, they say that there doesn't seem to be enough protections for the domestic violence issue from the legal system. I mean, it's a nightmare.
Right.
Really. What do you think about that?
So I think that it is better than it once was, but it is still far from perfect. And unfortunately, in the last year, we've begun moving in the exact wrong direction because So the federal law, the Violence Against Women Act, which first came about in 92, largely in response also to a Connecticut case, the Tracy Thurman case. I'm going to be talking about this at CrimeCon. Actually, this is sort of the subject of my lecture at CrimeCon. The National Violence Against Women Act set up a lot of, funding for state agencies. It set up a lot of mandatory language that had to go into law. Again, if state, you can't force a state to do something, but you can say we will withhold federal funding if this is not part of your legal system, right? And so every time that VAWA has been up for renewal, it has passed without any difficulty. This most recent time it was up, it got held up in the House until the 2018 election. That happened. It got past the House, and now the Senate is refusing to even take it up because it includes language to further restrict gun sales to convicted abusers, which seems like it should be a natural thing.
Seriously, yeah.
And it's being held up because it also enhances protections for LGBT and for Native Americans. And those are apparently super controversial subjects.
But those aren't. I don't like when they're not related like that. See, I get the first part with the gun.
No. It's related. Yeah. It's literally domestic violence. It's saying that they just wanted to add into the language because the original language was always like man and wife or boyfriend, girlfriend. It's covered a lot of different relationships for a lot of years.
It should be partner, maybe is a better term.
Right.
Domestic partner, whatever.
Because it also, the thing that a lot of people don't realize is DV laws also cover family members, not just the partners, right? So if my husband assaults my sister, that's domestic violence, even though it's not, so it's any relation by blood or marriage, or by blood, marriage, or shared living space or shared children. So even if two people never live together, if they share custody of a child or they have a child, so there are all these other enhanced protections that have grown up over the years that are right, and all that anybody had tried to do was include in the language so that there wouldn't be loopholes for abusers, right? So I had a number of same-sex DVs when I was an officer, one of which involved a claw hammer between two women and a claw hammer to the forehead. It was really bad. We were able to get those charges through. It was no problem. But there are states where the defendant could have technically gotten out of it because the language specified man and wife. Wow. So it's bad. We're going in the wrong direction.
Is there a uptick in part because of like in the military community with PTSD and stuff?
I would imagine that there is. I don't know the numbers offhand, but I'm sure. I mean, it's high within the military anyway. It's also higher within law enforcement families.
I wondered if it was enough to like sort of uptick all the numbers, but I don't know. I can't imagine there's that many guys coming home still that are going through that and doing that.
Well, they may not be guys going through it like right now, like that are just getting home, but a lot of the signs of PTSD or even traumatic brain injury and stuff like that, which can lead to this, we don't see right away. And we know that those have been getting worse, as like that they were underreported at the time. They were undertreated initially by the VA, all that kind of stuff. So it's possible. What we have going on right now is true crime is in this fantastic, sort of renaissance that we're all experiencing and we're all benefiting from. But it's also a community that is very interested in being active and engaged, not just being passive voyeurs of crime, right?
Sure.
And so I think if true crime starts to show these cases for what they really are and talk about it through that lens, then we have the right community that will get out there and say, I can't do a podcast of my own, or I'm not an armchair detective, but I can call my senator and say, why the hell are you sitting on this act? Or I can call my sheriff's department and say, why wasn't this guy arrested? So that's sort of what the talk is. It is tied into true crime, but it's about the prevalence of portraying DV as something sort of more salacious and less common when it's really quite common.
And you're doing this at CrimeCon, right?
Yes.
That was Sarah Cailean. If you would like to follow Sarah Cailean on Twitter, you can do that by following at CAILEANSARAH. Sarah Cailean, thank you once again for your time. Also, if you do think that you are suffering from domestic violence or you know someone that is and you're looking for resources and help, be sure to visit www.thehotline.org. You can also call 1-800-799-7233. They also have an option where you can text that number, or you can come to the website. You can chat with a counselor right there on the website. Also, remember, if you are struggling with thoughts of ending your own life, please do not hesitate. Call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. It's there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That goes the same for the National Domestic Violence Hotline as well. So these are amazing services, and I really appreciate having them.
Yeah, and please join us on the finale live stream on Wednesday, April 8th at 6 Pacific, and that's PM, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern on my channel, Gray Hughes Investigates, and make sure to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell.
You can find out more about the show at www.threemeninamystery.com. And if you're planning on coming to CrimeCon Orlando on May 1st through the 3rd to meet us and many of your other favorite podcasters and YouTubers, remember to use code 3men20 and you will save 10% off on your admission.
If you have any feedback, corrections, or new details, you can send them to us via email at 3meninamystery.com. Again, those are with the number 3s. Or you can reach out to us on Twitter with the handle at 3meninamystery, again with the number 3. Or you can find us on Facebook by searching for the podcast. And if you're looking for another true crime podcast to listen to while you're waiting for the next episode of 3 Men and a Mystery, consider Active Shooter. Here's a sample.
The investigation into the high school massacre is...
High school massacre.
At least 14 dead, 50 injured.
13 people were killed today in a mass shooting that includes a suspected gunman.
Active Shooter, a podcast that studies the psychology, motives, and methods behind some of the most notorious active shooters in North America and beyond.
East Alameda Avenue. They're saying somebody's shooting in the auditorium. 315 and 314.
We will discuss the whys, the hows, and most importantly, the proposed solutions.
16, I need a rescue in here. Hot, we got a guy shot.
Can the proper mix of mental health services and gun access put a stop to what has now become an accepted everyday occurrence? Have we become desensitized and accepting of this new phenomenon? Join us as we break down each case and discuss the failures that led to each event and how we can identify and stop them in the future. Join us soon, and please subscribe to Active Shooter.
3 Minute of Mystery is produced by John Lorden, Mike Morford, and Gray Hughes.
Please rate us on the podcasting platform that you found us on and help us grow by telling your friends and family about us.
We've got a lot more information to cover with Sarah Cailean, so we'll have another episode with her coming up in 2 weeks. I'm John Lorden.
I'm Mike Morford.
And I'm Gray Hughes.
And we are 3 Men and a Mystery.